Hi, everybody. So sorry I can't be there in person this morning. They're in Texas, but I'm so excited to be doing this and giving all this presentation. I know we've had a couple of delays, but everything is great now. I'm just going to go ahead and reintroduce myself for the new folks or, just others who may view this down the line. I am Cayden Chaffin. I am the outgoing East Texas Music Teachers Association's website and publicity chair for the 24-25 academic year. And I'm currently an undergraduate composition student at the Mannes School of Music in New York City. And today I'm going to be giving you this presentation on why integrating composition into your studio curriculum is powerful for your students, entitled Seeking Their Light. Alrighty, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. Just one second while I figure everything out. Perfect. Alrighty. So here's a great picture of me from a couple years back. But that's not why I'm talking to you. So I'm talking to you about how composition can really change lives with students. So because it's changed my own life, being a composer and a young composer and conductor now, it's something that's just so given me so much musical experience and just such a deep appreciation for the world around me, and it has changed my life's trajectory. And it's been a healthy outlet to process life's ups and downs. I've been through much grief in my life, and so it's helped me to sort of cope with that, and just or even if it's just simple as relationship dramas, just small things like that, or just the stress of everyday life. It's given me a passion for interacting with and making music daily. Every day I get up, I'm always listening to music. I'm always consuming music in some way. Right now I'm even in a practice room. So, it's just like I'm right after this, I'm going to practice piano. So, it's always given me, composition is giving me this tool to really find my passion in music. And it's given me a platform to advocate for social reform. That's such a big part of my mission as an artist, as leader, is to really use my music for a purpose and tell the stories of those who may not have a voice. And then it also has given me the space to grow and explore my beliefs, both socially and spiritually. So, it's given me that space to, increase my faith or, explore that side of me, and just really discover myself, and given me that outlet to find my own voice, just even in normal life, and so it's a very powerful resource and tool. So that's enough about me, I think. So what can it do for your students, though? Well, if they plan to pursue music in a post-secondary setting, it can better equip them for a future career. And this is based on the 2014 College Music Society's manifesto, where they sort of talked about this composer, performer, and improviser model. And what that sort of consists of is a lot of music degrees, or sort of the music programs that offer music degrees, are sort of shifting to this model where there's it's sort of diversifying, your portfolio and your talents as a musician. You're not just focusing on being a great pianist. You could also be, incorporating some composition in your theory classes and those sorts of things. And, even taking jazz improv because, just to give you that skill set. So it's easier for you to succeed in a ever-changing music field. And then it also utilizes and engages the students' creativity and problem solving. So this gives them just a really smart and fun way to develop those problem solving and reasoning skills. And it gives them that creative outlet, like it did for me. And then it also will reinforce your theoretical and technical knowledge that you're sort of teaching them in day-to-day lessons. You're going to find that, how they write for the piano, for instance, if you're teaching piano, is going to be reflective of what they're learning in technique wise, because I remember, whenever I write for piano, I'm always putting it under my fingers and, does this feel good for the instrument, and so they're going to do that. They're going to sort of apply that mindset to any instrument they're writing for, of course. And then, of course, they're going to have to know how to, your basic theory stuff, all the clefs, all the, notes, how the chords operate in a sort of functional way. And, because I think it was Stravinsky that said, you sort of have to know all the rules to break them in music. And finally, of course, in some cases, it may even spark a new passion. You may find the next great composer, great American composer in your studio, Yeah, I'm certainly not one of them, but it's it's that idea of finding and cultivating that talent early, just like you would for a concert pianist or a violinist or whatever it may be, you know. Right. So now, of course, you might be wondering, where do I even start? Like, how do I even get my kids, started in this, because it's such a big field, there's a lot of open-endedness in composition, and that can sometimes be scary. So let's just start with some foundational things that I think would help any studio just sort of to get your students started. First, I would really, really hone in on developing their improv skills, which is crazy because you might just think, improv is not only just for jazz musicians. It's such a misconception in our musical world that, it's, oh, you're a jazz player if you improvise, only jazz players improvise. No, Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, they all did this in their time, and every composer from antiquity to now, even myself, you have to sort of sit down, be able to sit down with the instrument or wherever and sort of come up with all of these things that you're writing down on the page. So, it's such a skill and an undervalued skill, I think, for most musicians, but especially for composers. So, how do we start that? Well, a great way to start that is, with some simple scalar exercises, incorporate your technique in that. I think that's such a big thing, like if you're teaching them the C major scale, let's start there. So a great example is allowing the student to use only like the first five notes of the major scale. So, do, re, mi, fa, so. And then to create the melody, and they only have those five notes to create a melody on top of just like a 4 bar chord progression, like, 1 4 5 1, just to give them that, it's just the simple harmonic struct framework that most theorists use, and make sure it's slow, it's a steady beat, make sure it's with a metronome too, because sometimes, what they might find in that is, and you can use 3 4 4 4, whatever time signature you want. I mean, I would start with 4 4, but, for younger students, but just to give them that sort of framework, controlled framework, which is something that you need, I think, for improv, because sometimes you're not just sitting down at a piano, you have to have the structured framework. And then, of course, if you have a little bit older or advanced students, we obviously, that might be a little too elementary. So we can introduce them to the 12 bar blues, incorporate jazz. I think jazz is such a powerful, powerful tool. It has certainly helped my harmonic language, and just how I improvise and sit down at the keys. So, introduce them to some of those more complex forms like that. And, let them experiment with different types of scales, your minor scales, your modal scales, your blues scales even, sort of using the same framework of like, okay, here's the chord progression, here's the 5 or 6 notes that you're allowed to use, over this progression. I'll start the metronome, and you or them, they can either play the, if they're a pianist, they can play the chords in their right hand or in their left hand, excuse me, and then they sort of improvise with their right, on top of you. Or if they're like a violinist or whatever, you can give them those chords and those sorts of things, so they can have still have that freedom and improv ability, with that harmonic, because I think it's really important to have that harmonic sort of background, and so like they know like, okay, this is how how you're constructing phrases early on, that's such a big thing. So I'll go and move on. Okay, so my next sort of foundational tip is to incorporate diverse repertoire analysis and music theory. Yeah, so you have to dedicate time to learning theory. I mean, for any studio, whether you're teaching them composition or not. I mean, I think, our organization, the ETMTA, does a really great job of this. We promote those theory tests every year, those sorts of, so we get a great foundation. And I think, really using that to our advantage to teach the next generation of composers is so important. So, but you also have to think about repertoire. You're assigning them repertoire, for your concerts and your juries or college auditions, whatever they have coming up concert wise. You have to give them some repertoire to learn. So whenever you're thinking about repertoire, think about, of course, what technical skills you're teaching them. What sort of things you're teaching, as well as theoretical ones too. I like to think, whenever things to keep in mind, when assigning that Beethoven sonata or a Chopin nocturne that you're doing, what form is the piece in? Is it a ternary form? Is it a rounded binary? Is it a sonata form? Or, and, does the composer follow, those sort of common practice period, harmonic tendencies? Does it give us that 1 4 5, one sort of feel, like, this tension resolution sort of thing, or is it more abstract? And I think in terms of abstract, this sort of later music, as we sort of get into more contemporary stuff, I'd never be afraid, to assign those sort of contemporary or late 20th century music, because it's such a powerful thing, to sometimes break those rules. And of course, not only are you exposing them to, what their peers might be doing, that are higher, who are in conservatory or whatever, finding those modern composers, sometimes they do write in a sort of romantic or a neoclassical sort of style. So, you could find those pieces as well, but you can also find these weird, crazy, zany pieces that you can assign them and be like, okay, this here is like a piece by like Schoenberg, and that's completely outside of the normal sort of common practice period, and be like, okay, we're gonna look at this 12 tone music, which seems crazy and like so such a hard thing to palate, but it really isn't. I think uh what I would suggest for those sorts of pieces, I mean, you don't necessarily teach them, 12 tone theory immediately, but you can focus on the sound world, like what's happening, musically, texture wise, like is it more sparse? Is it denser? Where are we going? What's the story the composer's trying to tell at the end of the day? Because that emotional connection will always, inform our music as composers as well. I mean, I'm constantly listening, like what's the journey that the composer is taking us on? So I think that's something very important to look for in those things. Now, my last sort of foundational tip is, of course, start with what they know. Familiar territory is always going to be easier. You sort of kind of you have to lead them along slowly. It's a hard. I don't think you can really start at Schoenberg unless they're already there. So and because the key is to meet the students where they are in their musical journeys. Let them start experimenting with whatever instrument they have, whether if they're a pianist or a violinist or a, trumpet player, even like really start with like, okay, this is the instrument we're going to stay on, it well, how to play it fairly reasonably, and what this sort of creates whenever you're starting with, just what they know already, is that's gonna give them that instant feedback that they, are gonna be craving, like they're gonna hear immediately, what is what I'm writing? What do I consider that good as a composer? Like they can starting asking themselves those critical questions of like, they're gonna start listening really intently, and they're gonna be like, oh, well, that fingering doesn't really work on that, part of that passage, like how can I make this easier for the hands or for the instruments, and for y'all as the teachers, it definitely can still tie back to your pedagogical goals, like whatever you're teaching them that technique, that they're sort of like, well, is this or is this not idiomatic? You can be there for that, to answer those questions and be like, well, is it, play it yourself, that sort of thing, and hear it and sort of work with them on that and growing that technique because they can, and then it'll sort of become second nature on their instrument and to write for their instrument. So your student brought you a sketch. Now what? That's probably the biggest question you're going to face. Well, so let's talk about growing your composers further. First thing is, of course, write it down. If the student doesn't bring in an already written sketch, write it down. Like if they bring you something that they can just play by memory or by ear or whatever, that's great. But part of being a composer, the biggest thing of being a composer is sitting down and actually writing it on paper so other people can play it as well, not just them. So how would I go about that? Well, I would first encourage them to use manuscript paper. There's something so, tactile, this sort of, kinesthetically engaging about, using manuscript paper for me at least, and I think your ideas get shaped a little better. You're not bound by a software, to be like, okay, well, I have to put it in this key, or if I want to change key, it's not as hard. You sort of have that free flowing thing. You can just erase and start over. With manuscript paper, it's so easy, and it also just helps to build that knowledge for whenever they get into their theory stuff, like it helps their penmanship with writing those treble bass clefs, or the alto clefs if you're fancy, those sorts of tactile skills that they're going to need, whenever they're doing theory testing or just in the future if they do pursue an undergraduate degree, in music. And then for the more advanced kids, I would suggest using free music notation. There's a lot of free software, like MuseScore. MuseScore is a big one. I highly recommend it for young composers. I've never actually used it myself, but I've heard great things. I have a whole bunch of peers who that's what they started on, and it's such an easy user interface to sort of get started on. I mean, even as a teacher, you might be scared and you might not know any of these softwares, like the back of your hand. It's okay, it's gonna be a learning experience for both of you, and I think it's so important in our 21st century world for to sort of help guide them on this journey to be like, okay, this is what the professionals are going to start using, like sort of getting their music looking more polished and everything like that. And of course, the further along they are in their journey, upgrading to more paid software, is a must, especially if they're going to pursue it in college. I was turned on to Finale very early, which is kind of sad now, given the fact that it's being phased out. I would have highly recommended it had it not, unfortunately, met its early demise. But we can check out other softwares like Dorico and Sibelius. Just sort of let the student choose and let the students guide that. Let them do their own research on that because and what's going to work best for them, especially with the user interface sort of aspect of it, because some people's workflows are completely different. But again, that's just for the more advanced kiddos that you might be teaching. Now, the second one is, and probably another big part of like really helping them on their journey, is learning how to give constructive criticism, which in composition, it's such a hard thing, because it's likely that, most of you, y'all may have taken a couple of composition related classes, or, you may have done it in theory or whatever, but, you may not have a whole degree. I technically still don't even have my whole degree in it, but but you are definitely more than qualified to help your student. I always like to start with notational feedback, which seems kind of picky and sort of like, but I think notational feedback, I mean, because as if it looks great, like if your scores look great, that's going to automatically set you apart as a composer, very early on, to sort of have that retentiveness about neatness on the page. And it's going to help the musicians in rehearsal. It's just going to build a great skill if their music looks really pretty and really well laid out and those sorts of things. But of course, you can't just focus on, the sort of nitpicky details. You want to also talk about the music. So I would let really how it works, I think, in a sort of composition lesson in a sort of private way, in a sort of one-on-one composition lesson, or my experience with that. It's always sort of been like the teacher really asks like the student, okay, what's your idea with this? Like you look at the sketch, you look at the piece or whatever, you look like, okay, you know, what is this going to be about? Do you have any ideas? Where are you going? Where are you trying to go with this piece? What are some, just talk through it with them, and then definitely you ask, what are their influences? What are they listening to right now? Are they, where did they listen to Stravinsky one day and be like, oh, okay, I really loved this. I love the Rite of Spring, and I want to write something kind of like that, in this vein with these notes or whatever. So it's really about taking that feedback in and being like, okay, let's try to guide it more that way, be like, okay, well, this is what Stravinsky did, or or Mozart, or whoever they're sort of emulating or listening to, and the context again is very paramount. You can sort of tailor make your comments to your students, based on this sort of direct feedback, and also relate their music to what they might even be studying at the time, because I feel like whenever I was in piano lessons a lot, and as a composer, I was always taking things from my actual repertoire. So, even subconsciously, I think it started happening, and I was just like, oh, I might have been studying a Haydn sonata or whatever, and I was like, oh, okay, like it's sort of the form sort of got in my head, or like this little motive got in my head, and if you sort of identify those things on the page, and sort of be like, look at what this is, or like if you're studying a sonata and they want to write a sonata, well, okay, well, how did Haydn lay this out, versus how are you going to lay it out? Are you going to sort of be more traditional? Are you going to break some of the tradition, sort of give them that, this is a very push and pull, sort of feedback, and sort of how you can see how other composers solve these problems and, approach these compositional things that your students may be discovering for the first time. Alrighty. And so my last thing to sort of build upon their foundation is, of course, finding a balance. I think you're trying to maintain a healthy balance, between your primary instrumental lesson and a comp lesson, because most of you are being like, okay, well, I'm just teaching them their instrument, but I think it's important to sort of touch on both aspects. If they find composition is for them, I think it's very, very important to sort of find what works for your studio, because you still want them to succeed at the concert. You still want them to practice and not just devote all their time to composition, because it is such a, being a performer is such a big part of composition, and developing those skills simultaneously, is really the only way to have a great, successful long, have some longevity in your career. And it's just helped me as well. So of course, let me talk to you about how to find a balance. So, of course, you want to assess the student. What are they engaging with more? They might be, for me, I still find myself neglecting piano a lot of the times more than composition, of course. I mean, not only because I'm, studying it as my degree, but it's just because I find composition just more fun, and just something that, like, I can get pulled into way easier than, sitting down and be like, okay, well, I have to practice this Haydn, or whatever it is. But I still definitely enjoy piano, don't get me wrong, but it's, that's just my balance, and so you have to find that balance in the student, like, what are they engaging with more? And then, okay, emphasize the point that it is, you should equally develop those talents, or skills, those skill sets are going to be so important. So if you find a student, neglecting one or the other, be like, okay, well, let's put that down, or, let's sort of go back to, like, do you really want to, keep doing composition, like those sorts of questions, and just assessing and, finding those benchmarks for the student. And as an example, a piano lesson can be balanced with a comp lesson by using the piano, as an orchestral teaching tool. Like, if you're teaching piano, of course, it's so easy. You can be like, if you're playing, a FRA piece or whatever, or Debussy, like those types of, saying, like, talk about orchestral color and, the color of the piano and how it's sort of reflective of having an orchestra under your fingertips and those sorts of things. And then you can also assign, some style copy etudes. That's one of the best exercises I can recommend. And whenever you're teaching composition, be like, okay, I want you to write a 16 bar piece that's in the style of Mozart, because you may be studying like a Mozart sonata or whatever it may be, and that's going to help them analyze their music, at home. And then, at home also compose, and then bring it to you and be like, okay, y'all can focus more on the critique portion of the comp, things where you're not just sitting there writing the whole, hour or whatever, however long you have, you can be like, okay, we're going to address this. And then you sort of tie it into your lessons of like, oh, okay, so so we have a little technical error here. Let's look at it, how Mozart conquered that, and like, let's look at your piece, like, play that part for me. And how does it feel under your hands? Those sorts of things. And so that'll really help, bridge that gap and really find that balance. And it just becomes this sort of natural, flow to your lessons. So the final part of my presentation is really just going to be talking about, how do we, foster our artistic journey, going forward, how do we really support them with what are the resources that they would need, And so my biggest thing, guide them to listen, listen, listen. Listening is the biggest part of any musician's career. And, like, that's, more so than even playing. I think sometimes, we always want to be consuming music, and it's what is one of the most crucial aspects. And so I would encourage your students to listen to as much repertoire as possible, let them let them listen to medieval chant, or get to some, more contemporary composers like, Jesse Montgomery and Kevin Putz, both Grammy Award winning, composers and, conductors and just great musicians. And I would also try to go beyond classical music. My artistic voice is really combining popular styles like jazz and R&B, especially, just some, country and rock and all of that with my classical, training, and infusing that with a sort of Stravinsky or, Mozart or Beethoven, and that sort of fusion is such a big thing, I think, in the 21st century, because we have access to all of these styles and artists and genres, and all of these things, it's sort of getting blurred in the contemporary classical music world about what is classical, where can we borrow from, borrowing. I mean, I would also, even recommend world music. There's a lot of great composers out there who have borrowed, from classical Indian traditions and, classical, but, just other Eastern traditions as well, even beyond Western music. And a fun assignment, for your students to sort of get them listening. And if they don't know really where to start, is to be like, let them find a piece a week that they enjoy, and they can find it from any genre, I mean, it could be a Taylor Swift song, like that's great listening. She has a lot of great things going on in her music, I would argue. So it's just like, if they can find that piece, and then I think the biggest thing is like what do they like about it? Sort of pushing them to identify like what's sticking out to them and why do they like this so much? What is it Taylor, if we're going back to the Taylor Swift example, is it her lyricism? Is it how the texture of the chords are working, like what instruments is she using, those sorts of things behind her, is it her voice timbre, like those sorts of analytical questions to sort of, get them listening with an active ear, no matter what it is, because so they can listen to Berlioz just as much as they can listen to, uh Taylor Swift, of course. Alrighty. Another big wet resource that I always like to use is phone a friend. I always say like I was Professor Google. I had a teacher at UT who always said, we weren't ever allowed to use Professor Google or whatever in our class. But I think in this context, you can. Google is such a great resource. It's free. It's easy. We all know how to use it. Uh, so that's really just always be on the lookout for opportunities for your students. I mean, sometimes it can be hard to manage, but really like just sometimes check MT and MNTA. It's just like our organizations will have so much surrounding us and direct us to the right places. Because it really does take a village to raise a composer. It certainly has. I mean, y'all are just as much as part of my journey, as my teachers now, and et cetera. So it's just, I thank y'all for that, first of all, just as a quick aside. But anyway, so going back to what I was saying, a great opportunity that I have both participated in and have been a mentor for in the past before I left UT is the UT Tyler's Composer Mentor Program, and it's led by Dr. Kyle Goings, the composition professor there. And it usually runs in the spring semester. I believe it's going on right now because it's March whenever y'all are seeing this. So I think it should be running. I think it's more of like a songwriting thing this semester, but that sort of rotates like every other year. So I think next year it's going to be a program where we have UT students who UT composers specifically, mentor some high school and even some college or some middle school, younger. It's sort of there's an age range, but we sort of grandfather some people in if we think okay, yeah, we could they really want to, or they really would like to learn all of these things, and so what they're doing is they're sort of meeting every week about and they have a set ensemble that they can write for. And what they're going to do by the end of this program is have either their first or a piece or just a piece premiered, at the concert, like that's all at a composer readings concert held by UT. And they're going to get that, the rehearsal process. They're going to get the, writing for instruments, other than, what they write for originally, So it's a great, 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 great program for any composer, but specifically, emerging composers, that you might have identified in your studio, that are sort of high school or, early college age, those sorts of things. And then, of course, I have to recommend pre-college online courses. It's a great way to sort of get your students really the foundational things that they're going to need, if they want to pursue composition at an undergrad or graduate level. It's going to give them those basics of music theory beyond. I mean, the theory testing ETMTA does really, really well, but outside of that, it's going to give them, like what actual college courses are going to be set up like, and ear training, especially. That's something I always continue to struggle with too, is ear training, training my ear. I'm in those classes right now. And, there's just such a big help for musicianship and, to be able to have those, skills and, practical skills is just such a great booster for any musical career, and there's also some more specialized composition, pre-college classes as well. I mean, and another good thing about these is you don't necessarily have to leave the state or, just even the East Texas area, because most of them are held online, and there's even a lot of programs that are, done by world-renowned conservatories. I know I know Juilliard has one, Berkeley, and the Jacob School of Music, at Indiana. I'm sure Dr. Larson could tell you more about that more than I can, but those are just some great resources provided by excellent top of the line accredited, conservatories. I think the new school may have some. I would have to send those at a later date to like really like give you pass on, those opportunities in New York. But I would, again, I'm not quite as familiar since I just arrived here a couple months ago. So, but anyway, another great resource for your, more advanced composers, if they're less like, if they have a good grasp of the basics and all of that, or, just want to look around at like what else there is for what other opportunities there are for composers besides, quote unquote formal study. It was the American Composers Forum. They have a great resources page. It's going to list every opportunity you can think of, whether it is academic, whether it's a composition competition or a summer festival. Those are that's how I found most of my opportunities in the high school and early undergrad was at that resources page, and I still check it frequently. I would say the only thing I do have like about, and the only hesitation about that page is you're going to see a lot of competitions that have fees attached to them. I would be very weary of those with fees because that's an investment on the student's part, and most of the time, those are a real big shot in the dark. That those may have 500 applicants, and if you're okay paying $25, and not getting that money back, that's okay. But it's just always that could be being cost conscious is always important with the competitions or whatever, because I would really, there's a lot of good great free ones that I would try, so before I would ever touch the ones with costs attached to them. Summer festivals, I will also say they're going to have an application fee usually attached. They have waiver options if there is a financial difficulty, so you can look that up all on their websites, like with Aspen or Tanglewood or where, I can give you more of those if you would like, we can connect on those as well. But yeah, always be wary of costs, for the student, because there will be some cost to some of those. So I would, just really do your research on those as well. And then finally, my last point that I want to make whenever we're really introducing this to students is let them create their own opportunities. It's such a big thing, to teach students, early on to be their own advocates. It's such a big skill that will propel them into a few fruitful professional career. Excuse me. It's that entrepreneurial spirit that you're fostering. That's a big part of my degree here at the New School. Is I'm currently actually in an entrepreneurial musician class where we're sort of talking about the sort of soft skills and those sorts of things that you would need, just even socially to go up and talk to people at networking events, and always have that sort of foundation set up, and always be open to opportunities and those sorts of things, and how that sort of relates to composite in a compositional way. Encourage them to write for themselves. We sort of talked about that a couple slides back, where you sort of start with what they know. We'll continue to do that. I think it's not about it's never bad to sort of be like, well, I'm a pianist, I would love to write more solo piano stuff or just stuff with piano in it. And I would be the pianist or whatever, because I mean, in my own experience right now, I'm currently writing a set of art songs, for baritone and piano, and I'm not going to be the pianist, and so I'm writing them for myself as well as, another musician, so I'm like, oh, okay, like I'm thinking about all of those technical things, and it's just easier because I don't have to find a pianist, I'm like, well, I think I'm qualified enough to do it, because I'm writing for myself, and also write for their friends too, I think, if they are a pianist, well, okay, let's write a string trio, because I mean, if the student knows a violinist and cellist, and they're friends at high school or whatever, or they're a flutist or a clarinetist or whatever, in their band program, they're gonna have friends, so encourage your student to ask them first as well, to be like, well, and especially, since the Helen Albert might be coming up, or I don't know if it's already passed because it's March, but anyway, with opportunities like the Helen Albert, to where it is a collaborative, festival that we hold, it's you talk to them, and you like, the students are like, okay, I would love to write for a trio or whatever, and I would love to get it premiered here. Well, perfect. You just have, that sort of creates that opportunity for you and your peers to have fun together, and get that rehearsal experience without all the pressure of being like, okay, well, this is a professional organization, I have to, or these are collegiate students that I don't know, like I'm, it sort of makes them less nervous and more comfortable with that process, and it'll be easier for them to get feedback because it'll be their friends, they'll be like, well, this doesn't really work, so this doesn't really work, Jack, we kind of have to, would you mind rewriting it? It's like, it's creating those soft skills, and that we're getting that rehearsal background. And I think my final tip, share the resources and any others liberally, so the student can always, dive into that wealth of opportunity that's out there in the great big world. That's something that I always felt like I hope that I'm really good at. I'm trying to always continue to get better at is really just saying yes to a lot of things too, because I mean, you never know where something's going to lead you. I honestly, I will be honest here. I mean, I didn't really think I was going to get to New York this early, and to sort of jump in and try this out and to be like, okay, and it was a shot in the dark, my application here, and I got accepted, so it's like that sort of, you never know what's going to be hiding in the next opportunity. You never know when the next opportunity is going to be, if you don't say yes. I think it's Michael Jordan. He says you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So always take a shot, even if it's a shot in the dark. You never know. Some of my greatest opportunities have just been like, I just found this online and I randomly submitted an application or whatever, like, so those sorts of things can always, and just fostering that sense of like, dedication and being like, even if you're told no, to keep going because there's going to be something out there for you that's meant for you and your journey. Um, so that's it. Actually, that's really all I have for y'all today. I thank y'all so much for your time and letting me come here and do this for y'all. Again, I'm so sorry that I couldn't be there in person. But I hope everybody's semester again is going great and it just continues to be joyful. I hope, there was some tidbits in there that sort of will help you in your studio and in starting, your kids on this composition journey that I've been so fortunate and blessed to make my life and my life's work. And please feel free to reach out to me. I am always an email away. I mean, especially for my ETMTA folks, you all have my email. Always reach out. Follow me on social media. I have all my platforms right here, of course. Just sort of keep track of my journey and all the things that I'm doing. And then, I always just want to say, it's just take it one step at a time with your students, and always encourage them that there is going to be a path for them in composition, no matter who they are and, or wherever they started, I will tell you, like whenever I started composition, I was nowhere near where I am today, even, or where I'm growing into, and as a musician. And so it just really helped. It sort of spurred me, to become a better musician and to have that drive again, for music. And it's just really has done so much for me. And I just hope that I can pass that blessing on to others, especially through this presentation, of course, to help y'all and to give y'all some resources. But if you ever have any questions or, you need extra resources or you just use, have any thoughts or things about this or how I can make this better or anything like that, please, please, please feel free to reach out to me. Again, I'm only an email away, and I will always be willing to help anybody who comes my way and help them on their journey just as much as y'all have helped me on mine. So without further ado, thank y'all so much. Have a great rest of your day. And I hope to hear from y'all soon. Bye.